Hello, it's August. That's ridiculous. I can't believe it's already August. Um, I did a ton of reading in July, and I feel like my August may be a slowdown, just because I haven't caught up on anything else. So I have some things I know I put on my August TBR, but I'm probably going to be a little slower. You never know, though. I could say that and have things be very different. Sir Chonk didn't do much in terms of reading this month. So he had a couple, but I think I'm just going to kind of tell you what he read, and the little bit he said about them, just because he didn't read a whole lot this month. And hopefully, I think he'll get back to it now. He was doing some other stuff, and then when you see his, I think you'll know why. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, the majority of my month was focused on the Battle of the Bands Readathon Part 2, The Decades, with the Bookish Drummer. And I'll tag the team leads in this as well. I was on Team Nirvana, and I don't know yet. It's the first, so I don't know. I think we'll have a live show probably tonight or tomorrow once everything's been tallied. And then we'll find out, who won. Last I heard, we were in last place. But I know a lot of our team kind of pulled things together at the last minute. So we'll kind of see how this goes. But this was a huge part of my month, was reading the prompts for this and making sure I got them all in. And a lot of people I found, I was like, how are people finishing so fast? But I think a lot of people listen to audiobooks, and so they have like their reading time, but they also, when they're doing things around the house or whatnot, they'll basically be, they'll be listening to an audiobook. Unfortunately, I do not have the attention span to be able to remember I'm listening to an audiobook, and I either fall asleep or just completely forget I'm listening to it and, have gained nothing, retained nothing of it. So I had to read all 16, and, so it was a while. So I'm going to go through the prompts and then kind of what I read for them, my thoughts on the books. And then there are a few things I read outside of the readathon as well. So the first team, and this is Ian the Reader's team, is the 70s, and that's Fleetwood Mac. And so the prompts are Go Your Own Way, which is a book you didn't think anyone would buddy read with you. 2, Don't Stop, a book with a relentless character who will stop at nothing. 3, Dreams, a book with a character or in a situation or place you would dream of being in. And 4 is The Chain, which is a scavenger hunt. Here's the scavenger hunt, but basically it was like, picking letters and things on the cover and, so on. So the 4 books I read, and so the way this worked is you would gain 30 points for your team if you read for your team's prompts and take 10 points away from the other teams. So I was able to complete all 16. So the first prompt was a book no one would buddy read with you. And so I read Under the Tamarind Tree, which comes out on the 15th. And this is historical fiction / contemporary fiction. It's one of those dual timelines. So there's a part that takes place in the 60s, and there's a part taking place now, and it's set in Pakistan. And it's actually about, so the current day is about this older woman, and she's living in Pakistan, and this young girl is helping her with her garden, and the young girl is the granddaughter of a guy that she had known sort of back in the day. And then the flashbacks to sort of what happened and why she hasn't kept in touch with these people that she was friendly with when she was young. And young, being in her 20s, it wasn't like young, but it was, her early parts of her life. And under all of this, and some of the things that happen have a lot to do with partition. And so that was in particular what intrigued me about this book, was that all I know about partition, the partition or whatever, however you call it, all I know about it is from Doctor Who and Ms. Marvel episodes, which is ridiculous, but we didn't really learn about it in school. And so I was really excited to read a book about that period. It's not actually, you don't actually learn, it's not set during there, but there's some, essentially the events of partition, which is the, I think 47, the events of that lead to some of the things that happen in the 60s part. So it's kind of a mystery, kind of just sort of family literary fiction, kind of contemporary historical fiction drama. Really solid book, liked it. Definitely different, but I just figured I didn't have a lot of people I knew who would like be interested necessarily. And I always think it's fun to like read something about a culture you don't get a ton about in, that are like kind of the big books. So I really enjoyed like just being immersed in a different culture and kind of understanding, there are certain events that occur and, obviously in the context of even like America in the 60s, some of it was understandable, certain behaviors and just certain attitudes. But other things would be things that, would be kind of alien to us and we wouldn't really understand. And a lot of it has to do with like family and honor and, kind of what you owe other people. And so, yeah, this is a book I would highly recommend checking out as well. If that interests you, if you're interested in like historical fiction, especially about, cultures you don't really read a lot about. So it is about Pakistan. And so, yeah, it was a solid read. The second one was a character who will stop at nothing to get what they want. And this was Delicate Condition. And this actually is out now. This is about a woman who is absolutely determined to get pregnant, like under any condition, she wants to get pregnant. And it's kind of gothic horror. It's actually going to be the foundation to this season's American Horror Story. So if you're into American Horror Story, you should probably check out the book. Just came out. My only problem with it was like really, really heavy on like pregnancy and the desire to be pregnant. And like, I don't have kids. I don't want kids. I've never wanted kids. And so like this for me, it was just like not my worldview. And I was like, well, this is interesting, but it's like hard to really empathize in a lot of places because I'm like, so just don't have kids. Like this is too much work, So, and there are a lot of details just about like pregnancy and so on. I mean, it's definitely an interesting read. And I can see a lot of people loving this. I just, that would be like why I didn't absolutely love it. I think I was just like, it was a little too much on the pregnancy stuff. And then coming out next week, so this is A Situation You Dream of Being In. And this is the last one by Will Dean. And this is about a woman who goes on this cruise, this transatlantic cruise, from England to the U.S. with her, like, significant other, her boyfriend, I guess. But she's older, so it's like, I think she's in her 40s. But, this person she's kind of starting a new life with. And she wakes up and there's no one else on this cruise. And it's just her. And, like, she can't figure out where they went. And so that was the situation I dream of being in. It's not necessarily being trapped on a boat and like horrible things happen and being this horror mystery kind of situation. But I was just like, how nice would it be to be like I don't actually want the whole crew to disappear or anything because I don't know how to drive a cruise ship. But although I guess the cruise ship is pretty much like self-driving anyway. But what I really liked here is I was like, oh, I would love to just be on a boat all by myself and not have to deal with people. So that was my situation I wanted to be in. In terms of this book, and it's really hard for me to explain, I would say it was like middle of the road for me. I was really into it. Like it was hard to put down. I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen, but then I was disappointed in the end. And part of it's just because I was waiting for like a different twist. And about like a quarter to a third of the way through, I was like, well, this is an interesting direction. I'm definitely creepy. So like, if you like creepy, I think a lot of people will really love this. There's a movie that has and it's a cheesy movie. Don't get me wrong. It's not like a good quality movie or anything, but there's a cheesy movie that basically has almost the exact same plot with like some minor differences. And so like, at one point I was like, this is pretty much the plot of said movie. And then it just kind of, that continued. And I was like, yeah, I've seen this before. So a little different, but I was like kind of disappointed because I was like, I feel like I've already seen this. So again, it wasn't a very popular movie. I mean, it was okay. I think it did all right, but I'd be curious if you did read it and if you recognize the movie, let me know. I'm not going to say anything, but and then for the scavenger hunt, I did The Only One Left by Riley Sager because I was like, I have to figure out a way to get this on here. So I loved this book. This was not only a 5-star read, it was my favorite Riley Sager, and I'm a huge Riley Sager fan. I know a lot of people are like, can be kind of hit or miss with him. His women, I do understand that some people find his women really annoying. I love them. I relate to them. They're like a lot like my younger years. But this was fantastic. If you put people on an island or in like a kind of like in a creepy house near an island or near the water, gothic horror, like I'm all over it. I love gothic horror. I love like creepy houses. I especially love creepy houses near water. I don't know why, but this is basically this woman becomes a caretaker for this old lady, and this old woman was accused of murdering her whole family like years and years ago. And there's like a whole rhyme about it. Very Lizzie Borden. And it's on the coast of Maine. Very good summer read, by the way, like, because it's just got that summer read feel, because, on the water in Maine. But gothic, it was creepy. I couldn't put it down. The characters were fun. I mean, honestly, like, this book I felt was like near perfect, if not perfect. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. If you've read other Riley Sager, I will say, like, my favorites have been Final Girls and Lock Every Door. And I really liked The Last Time I Lied. The only one I haven't read is Survive the Night, which everyone says is terrible. But I thought the House Across the Lake was okay. And one of the things I didn't like about it, and I know a lot of people, the reason this is divisive, the element in that I think is divisive for a lot of people is not in this. And so I don't know, that may not be what you didn't like, but what I didn't like about it was not in this book. And so I was very, very happy because it met every need I had for a book. So definitely love this book. Can't recommend it highly enough. It's out. Go read it. It's awesome. If you don't like Riley Sager, we can't talk. I'm just kidding. But, yeah, I really did. I really love this book. So, those were my Fleetwood Mac prompts. So, again, Under the Tamarind Tree, Delicate Condition, the last one, and The Only One Left. So, I took 40 points away from Fleetwood Mac. And then, so for Journey, which is the 80s, we had Any Way You Want It. So, a book with a spoiled or greedy character. Who's Crying Now? A book that has made someone else cry. Open Arms, a book in a genre or subgenre you're willing to try more of. And Don't Stop Believing, a book in a series you believe will be completed one day. Coming out on the 22nd, I went with Burlington for a spoiled or greedy character. And this is very much like kind of Stepford Wives-y. I mean, it's not the Stepford Wives, but basically this woman moves to Burlington, Vermont, and I had a really hard time with it being set in Burlington, Vermont. And I don't know, maybe she's from Burlington, Vermont, but like for me, Burlington is like about as earthy crunchy as you get. And so the idea of this like diehard mom group that's like destroying the lives of all the women around them and stuff, I was just like, this just does not jive with my understanding and my experience of Burlington. But again, I'm not a mom, so but basically that's what it's about. It's about a really like a bunch of rich women who are very critical of how other people like live their lives and are awful to each other. And so like kind of like Desperate Housewives, a little bit like It's a Big Little Lies, except instead of being like nice to each other in the end, like they're just awful. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. I mean, like, it wasn't I didn't love it, and I didn't dislike it. So, I had things that I did enjoy about it, though. I'm going to kind of see if I have, like, a lot of my feedback open. So, yeah, so I mean, I thought this was really solid. I said it reminded me of Leanne Moriarty. The characters are horrible. And I guess my problem with it, I guess the only reason I didn't give it like a 5-star review, is I literally hated every single character, including the protagonist. Like, I was just like, I hope every single person in this book dies a horrible, miserable death. And so, that's okay. I'm okay with that. But that's why I didn't have 5 stars, because at some point I was just like, I hate every person in this book, and I hope it's horrible things happen to them. And horrible things do happen to a lot of them, but so that would be my problem, I guess. That's why I didn't love it. But this comes out the 22nd. I definitely can see, a lot of women are really enjoying this. Especially, like, I do think if you are a mom and have ever had to, like, be part of those, like, school mom groups, like, my knowledge of that and my experience with that is, like, watching Bad Moms and being like, wow, Christina Applegate's character is, like, the worst. And then just, like, moving on with my life. So, but I'm sure there's plenty of women who will, like, really relate to this. So for the book that made someone cry, I went with Whalefall. And I was really happy because I was looking at reviews before I read it, and someone was like, I cried on every single page. And I was like, oh, good, because I don't know a lot of books. I don't read the type of books that make people cry usually. So, although I will get to a few that made me cry. So this book comes out next week. This was not a good fit for me. I feel like everyone has loved this book, and I really wanted to love this book. It looked so cool. It just was, like, right up my alley. I was, like, super interested. And it's about this guy who's diving, and he gets eaten by a sperm whale. And I guess I thought it would be a little bit more, like, fantasy or, like, sci-fi, but not, like legitimate science. But it's really basically, like, super detailed about diving, and I'm not a diver, and I don't know enough about diving, and there's all this, like, discussion of diving things. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on right now. And then a lot of, like, detail about, like, how you would actually survive, if you were eaten by a sperm whale, and I just didn't really want to know all those things. Like, I don't plan on being eaten by a sperm whale, and I was, like, kind of grossed out, because it was, like, just really, like, like how to blow up a sperm whale and get out of a sperm whale and stuff. And I was like, okay, I mean, you can tell this writer did so much research, and, like, I admire that. But I was just not interested. And I also admit, like, I did not connect to the main character at all. And I can see, like, a lot of people probably will. And I think it's a lot, like, I hear people say, like, oh, I hate this character because it's got this whiny girl and I just don't find her interesting. And I'm like, oh, but I loved her, and I get it. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of guys and probably women too who will, like, really relate to this guy. He's dealing with the tragedy of his father's death and, coming to terms with his relationship with his dad. And, like, I'm sure that's relevant and, like, people will have similar experiences. But I didn't. And so therefore I was bored. So it just wasn't a good fit for me. I definitely recommend it, though, because I think it's really well written, and I think as long as you know what you're getting into, I think you'll enjoy it. But just be aware, it's very heavy on the science and very heavy on the diving stuff, so if those are, like, not things you care about, you may not like it just because it's so detailed and technical and well-researched. So, again, that's a pro, but also, I guess, a con. So the next one I had for the journey prompt was a genre you would like to try more of. And I have had really bad luck with fantasy. Like, I love A Song of Ice and Fire. I like a lot of fantasy stuff. Like, I liked the Mortal Instruments series and Infernal Devices. So that's like YA urban fantasy. But I liked those. Obviously, I liked Harry Potter. I love his Dark Materials. So, like, there's definitely, like, fantasy that I've liked. I mean, I like Narnia, I like Lord of the Rings. I don't love Lord of the Rings, I'm not like a diehard Lord of the Rings fan, but I definitely, like, think it's good. And I always, like, want to like fantasy. And then for a while, I just kept getting recommendations for fantasy novels from a couple of members of my family or friends. And what I've learned is that they don't like fantasy. They like either romantic fantasy or fantasy romance. And I do not. And so they would keep recommending these fantasy books. And I'm like, I do not care at all about who this person is dating. And it just was all love triangles and a bunch of nonsense. And like half the guys are total jerks and scumbags. And I'm like, what is attractive about this man? He's like super like abusive to her. And he's like calling her names. And it's like, there's like some kidnapping and there's violence against them. And they're like, but he's so sexy. I'm like, no, I'm not having it. So, and I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who know exactly which books I'm talking about, but they're not for me. And I know like you're not allowed to say that, but they're just not. And again, if you want to read that and you like it, like I have no problem with other people liking it. That's just not what I like. And so I was having a really hard time because people kept like recommending fantasy to me, and I would just keep getting this like romance that was like every so often would have like a weird name of a place. And I was like, okay. And so I was getting really annoyed, or there'd be like a fairy or something. And so I tried a couple other ones, and just they weren't working for me. And then I read Spear Cuts Through Water. Absolutely loved it. I read Nettle and Bone. I love that, but that's like fairy tale and folklore. And I'm like, okay, so maybe I don't like traditional high fantasy, even though I love A Song of Ice and Fire. But maybe it's more historical fiction, and I like that element. So somebody had recommended, I think it was actually over on StoryTube. He's always like talking about how great Mark Lawrence is. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to read this Prince of Thorns. And then a couple other people have been like, yeah, he's a great character. He's super dark. He's like a sociopath. And so I flew through this book. I loved it. I will warn you that like there's like implied rape on like the first or second. Well, actually, it's like, but it's in the first few pages. And the kid's like 14, and he's like it's implied that he's like raping the women after like they like destroy this town. And that's how like you open the book. And so that was a little off-putting, and I can get why like people were like, oh my God, this is horrible about women. And like I just throw that aside. I'm like, oh, whatever. I mean, and the reality is like that's kind of, unfortunately, in like patriarchal societies, that's just the way things go. And I'm not saying like, oh, it's a fantasy world, we should just accept it. I'm just saying like if it's based on like patriarchal structures, and we're talking about something that's based on like, you know, the medieval structure or any patriarchy, really, women are unfortunately, you know, generally in these scenarios, a lot of them are left to being either like, if they're not, you know, part of the court, then they're going to be, you know, taken as sort of like a spoils of war, or they're in like, you know, the whorehouses or whatever. So, I mean, it's not great. And I'm, you know, don't get me wrong, I would love it if those were not realistic things, but I also am just like, you know, that is, you know, that still happens, you know, like, unfortunately. So I'm not totally like upset about it. I mean, again, I don't love it. And it's not graphic. I mean, I'll say like, it's really not graphic. If it was super like disgusting, I would probably get upset. But like, you know, I don't feel like when I'm reading it, like the writer's like, haha, I'm going to throw this in here. And it's like, because I hate women or anything. Like, I think he's just like, this is the type of society it is. But I think the one problem I had with this book, I had two problems. I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. But, like, I guess I had 2 problems with it. One is that at the end, it just kind of really, and I guess this was his first book. And so, it, like, all of a sudden, the last, like, 10% was just like, these things are happening, these things, and over. And I was like, whoa, what happened? Like, it was like whiplash at the end. So I have already gotten King of Thorns. I'm really excited to read that. But yeah, like it was so sudden. And then, the other thing I mean, and I don't want to spoil it, but basically, like, I loved the main character, and everyone's like, oh, he's a sociopath. And I'm like, am I a sociopath? I don't think so. I just thought, like, he's kind of brutal, yes, but, like, I totally get where he's coming from, you know, and, I mean, he has some trauma in his life, and I do think, like, some of the way he thinks, you know, we want to pretend we're all, like, good, and we all want, like, you know, the Harry Potter story where, like, love conquers all, and But I mean, in reality, like, I just think, like, sometimes, there's something to be said for, like, just nihilism and being like, you know what, if you want to win or you want revenge, then you're going to have to make immoral decisions or amoral decisions. The only problem I have with that, though, is there's, like, a little bit of, like, information revealed a little later that I was, like, kind of disappointed was revealed, because I was, like, totally fine with, I was, like, totally on the character's side. I was totally on board with things he was doing, and then it's like, is it entirely in his control? And I was like, yeah, it's in his control. Just like, I don't need that. So anyway, I love this book. I'm not telling you anything new because I think most people know about Prince of Thorns. But anyway, and then the next one comes out next week again. And this is Dark Corners by Megan Golden. And this was series you believe will be finished. And clearly this was meant to be a George R.R. Martin prompt, but I've already read A Song of Ice and Fire, and I simply was just not going to try to get through, the Fire and Blood or something in, when I had 16 books I had to read, because they can take a little while. I mean, I do think George R.R. Martin reads really fast for how long his books are, but at the same time, I don't think Fire and Blood is as, like, narrative, and I also think even when they read fast, I mean, they still take a while because they're very long. So, this prompt, I think, was obviously hinting at, hurry up, George, and write your book. But this is the second book in a series, and what I found about Dark Corners that I really liked is that this was the sequel to Night Swim, and I'm actually going to have, like, a review on this book coming up, so I'm not going to do a ton about it, but I think this has, like, so much potential to just be a massive series that could just go on for a long time. This is very different than Night Swim, and I think that sets up potential for, like, the books to kind of go in different types of directions, and, this main character kind of being this sort of hook. And so I think it'll be finished, but I also think this may go on for a while, and I really kind of hope it does. So those were the 4 I read for Journey, and those were the 40 points I took away from Journey. So then moving on to my team, and this was Nirvana, and I did most of our prompts last, which was probably not the smartest move, although I think they thought we were, like, out of the game, and so everyone just kind of, like, left us alone, which kind of worked out. I don't think it was intentional strategy, it just was sort of the way it worked out. But so our prompts were Smells Like Teen Spirit, a book featuring a rebellious teenage character, Lithium, which is a book with an element from the periodic table in the title, Come As You Are, a book you had on your TBR for July prior to this readathon, and then All Apologies, a book you had to apologize for not reading yet. So I have a book that comes out on the 15th, and this is the rebellious teen character, and this is The Last Girl Standing. And okay, so this was a book about summer camp counselors who are all killed off except the 2 final girls. And the 2 final girls end up in a romantic relationship with one another, and but then the main character is starting to wonder if, like, the other girl might have been part of, like, the killings, because there's things she feels like she lost her memory from the trauma, and, like, she can't seem to and so she's, like, depending on this other girl, and, like, is what she's telling her true? And then there's, like, this whole thing about this, like, eco-terrorist death cult, and I was like, okay, so summer camp and death cults, and yes, I am so excited, but I did not like this book. I'm gonna be totally honest. The ending is kind of cool, but, like, because it definitely, like, is not where you think it's going. If you like a lot of, like, YA where things end like a lot of YA books do, you may be disappointed. If you like the characters, I could not stand the 2 main characters. I was like, oh my god, especially the main character. I was just like, I just kind of hope that whoever killed everybody on this, like, at this camp finds the 2 of them and takes them out too, because, like, the world would be a better place without these 2 absolutely irritating people, which is not good, but I found them so irritating. I will say that one of the reasons I found them irritating is because the main character is supposed to be dealing with, like, all this trauma, and I will say, like, the whole world around her, like, her parents are just like, why haven't you gotten over it yet? And it's been, like, 3 months, and then, like, her friends are like, you're so boring, why don't you want to come see, like, horror movies with us? Why are you so, like, are you still hung up on this, like, watching 10 people, 8 of your friends get murdered? And I'm kind of like, I know people can be kind of, insensitive and not, like, totally understanding of PTSD and, and triggers and things like that. But I was a little like, I mean, it's only been a couple months, or like, at least that's how I read it. It's only been a few months. Maybe it's been years. I think it's only been a few months. And I'm like, maybe we, like, are terrible people if we're not, like, remotely sympathetic. The other thing I kind of didn't like is that I felt like her trauma was more of a plot device. So it was like, oh, she doesn't have these memories because she's traumatized. But then it was like she would just, like, forget that she was traumatized, or it was, like, only how it, like, worked in the plot. And I was like, okay, I mean, like, and I'm not going to speak to, I don't know the author's situation, and, like, everybody responds differently to trauma. So, I'm not the expert on it. I mean, obviously, like, I have some experience there, but I'm not the expert on it. And, maybe, my experience is just different than somebody else's. And so I can't say that, like, it's definitely not realistic, but I was a little put off by that. But the one thing I guess I think is good is that the main character was really annoying to me, because she would be like, let's solve this murder, and also I have all this trauma, and then, like, her girlfriend would show up, and she'd just be like, she's hot, let's make out. And I was like, hello, you're like, you think she might be in some death cult, she might have killed your friends, and you just want to make out all the time. But I was kind of like, how many books do you read where it's like the girl is just, like, vapid and does all these stupid things because of some guy, because she has a crush on her boyfriend or whatever? And I was like, at least this time she's doing it and being dumb for a girl. So some good LGBTQ, it's not good representation, but at least it's, like, probably authentic, because just, like, a girl could be really annoying and, like, one-track minded about her boyfriend. I'm sure she can be about her girlfriend too. So I was like, well, at least she can be annoyingly obsessed with her girlfriend. So I don't know. I mean, maybe YA people love it. I mean, and this cover, I really wish I loved this book, but I didn't. So anyway, it comes out in a couple weeks. For the element in the title, I went with The Golden Spoon. This book should have been, like, my absolute favorite book of all time. So it is set in a baking competition that takes place in a tent outside of a manor home. I mean, it's pretty much like, it's the Great British Bake Off, but it's not. It's called Bake Week, and it's in Vermont. But let's be honest. I mean, everything, like, even, like, everybody has, like, the matching, like, fridges and stuff, but they're different pastels. And I was like, okay. I mean, they have two hosts, judges, and the judges are, like, this, like, very serious older woman in her 80s who's, like, this renowned, like, exceptional baker, and then this guy who's on, like, cooking shows, and he's, like, obnoxious, and he, like, clearly is, like, a womanizer. And so, I mean, like, it's not even remotely subtle about how obviously, except for the fact that I don't think, like, the woman is, like, a little nutty, and I don't think Mary Berry, or Prue Leith, I don't think Mary or Prue is, like, a nutcase. I think they're just, older women. But, I mean, the guy is definitely not that coded of, like, a Paul Hollywood type. So it was just really interesting. But the problem with this book is, like, the mystery doesn't, so basically it was like Clue or And Then There Were None meet The Great British Bake Off. And I was like, okay, those are my favorite things. Like, put them into a book. I'm so happy. But 80% of the book is literally just, like, the 6 contestants and then the judges switching between their narration while they go through, the funniest part was, it's like, you're like 10% in and it goes, day 1, bread. And I was just like, yes. Which, if you're a Bake Off fan, you'll think is hilarious, but like, then it's like, then basically there's a bunch of chapters about them baking bread, and they're, like, each describing their bread that they made. And then, like, the next one was, like, pie, and they each describe a pie they make, and it's like, and then there's the judging of the pies and who wins and who's going home that day, and then you get into cake, and you're like 80% of the way into the book until there's really a mystery involved, and until there's, like, a body. because there's a murder mystery as well. And so there's like an older mystery and then a current mystery. But like none of that really happens until almost like the last 20% of the book. And I kind of felt like it was really just tacked on. And I didn't care by the time I got to that. I was like, I just want to know who wins this bake-off. I want to know what they make on the last 2 days and who wins, who wins the golden spoon. And I kind of feel like the author was like, I want to write a bake-off book because everyone loves bake-off, the bake-off. And like, I know at some point, like the editors were like, we can't sell this. It's too niche. And like, there's not enough of an audience. So like throw a mystery in and then we can like sell it to more people. And I was like, I just want a bake-off book. And so like, if you love the Great British Bake Off, you should probably still read it, but the mystery is definitely disappointing, and I almost feel like it's unneeded, and I just kind of wish I could get like that 20%, and we could have, instead of it getting like off track to this mystery, that we could have just enjoyed, the last 2 days of the competition. I don't even know I know whose cake was the best, but I mean, what were the other 2 days going to be, and then who was going to win the spoon? We'll never know. It's very disappointing. All right, so for a book that was already on my TBR, I had Just Another Missing Person by Gillian McAllister, and that's out now. And this is really interesting mystery about a girl who goes missing, and there are some really cool twists in this book. I loved it. I loved Wrong Place, Wrong Time. That was one of my favorite books of the year. And so I was really excited about this. And for me, it was like a little bit of a step down, but that's just because I was so blown away by like the time travel sort of Groundhog Day element of that book. This one doesn't have that. It's a more straightforward like missing person thing. And there's a lot of really good characters, but they're really gray. And so I definitely enjoyed that. I thought the characters were phenomenal. I thought the book itself was just really well crafted, well paced, a lot of interesting twists. There was a point and I was like, oh, I did not see that coming. And like, I love that when that happens. The only, I guess, complaint I have is that, so like, it says the weapon isn't a gun or a knife. It's a secret, her worst one. And the problem I have, and I don't know if I'm naive or if it's like an American, British, like criminal justice system thing, but the main crime, so if this is about a detective, basically, and she has kind of helped her daughter cover something up. And so a lot of this story is actually about, like, parents and how far they'll go. And you have, like, the parent of the missing girl and then the parent of the potential suspect. And so it's very interesting because, like, what would you do? What would you do for your kid? What if you thought your kid was like involved in the crime? Like, what would you do would you cover it up? Would you like turn them in? And so there's a lot of really cool, like, moral questions and stuff. I love this book. I really did like it. And Gillian McAllister is fantastic. And I can't wait to read anything she writes. But, the problem, I guess, was that, like, the overarching thing, the thing that this cop spends the whole book feeling guilty about is this thing that she helped her daughter with. And I was kind of like, did she do anything that bad? Like, it's not good, but it's like, she's like, we're all going to go to jail for the rest of our lives. And it's like, really? Like, would they? And I don't know, maybe they would. And I'm, like I said, I'm naive, or maybe like the British criminal justice system is just different than the American criminal justice system. And so like, that kind of was a hang up for me, but honestly, like, I got past it fairly quickly, and then the rest of the book was just great. So I recommend this a lot. And if you liked Wrong Place, Wrong Time, you'll probably really like this. And even if you didn't, I think you may like it. It's a good mystery. There's a lot of twists, and it's a very character-driven mystery. So, and then for apologies for not reading yet, I had These Silent Woods because I had it, and it was sitting on, like, my list from the library, and there were, like, a bunch of people waiting, and I was like, I should probably read this book. And then I just kept going and reading other things, and then I was like, I have like 2 days left to read this book. Should I just return it, or should I like read it? And because I was like, these people have been waiting for like 2 weeks to read it. So I read this, and my apologies were first. Sorry, it took me all 2 weeks. This was okay, but like, this reminded me a lot of the book, My Abandonment, which became the foundation of the movie Leave No Trace with Ben Foster. And it's been a long time since I read My Abandonment, and it's been a fairly long time since even Leave No Trace came out. And so I don't totally remember like which elements of that story are what I remember of the book and which ones I remember from the movie. But I do remember the general concept there. And so when I was reading this, I was like, I kept remembering that and being like, oh, this is kind of like that. But, and they're different enough. Like, it's not like, I don't feel like, it's not like, oh, I've read this book before. It just kind of kept reminding me of how much I liked that story. And so I did like it, but I didn't love it. And that would just be why, because like, just reminded me of something I had read before that I liked. I don't know if I liked it better, if it's just because I read it first, So that was Nirvana. So I got all of the points, 120 points for our team. Yay. All right. And then the last set for the readathon. Okay. And so the last group is Green Day. And we have American Idiot, a book featuring an ignorant character. Boulevard of Broken Dreams, a book with loneliness or isolation as a theme. Wake Me Up When September Ends, a book you would typically read during spooky season. And Know Your Enemy, a book from the enemy team captain's favorites list. So my book for the ignorant character was Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. This comes out next week. I loved this book. I'm going to give you a detailed review on this one. There's a big review coming out. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is, if you liked Hyde, you may like it, you may not, because Hyde, I think, is a little more like traditional horror. This is more psychological horror. It's an ignorant character because like the girl doesn't even know she was on the TV show. She forgets like everything from her childhood. But it's basically these people who are on this kids show when they were younger, and now they're like reconnecting. And again, I'm going to have a whole video on this, but this is technically a horror novel, and it's definitely creepy, and there was a lot of creepiness happening early in the book, but about like halfway through the book, I was like so invested in it, but then it just started getting so like nostalgic, and like, I don't know, it, like, in Hyde, if you read Hyde, you may remember like her author's note at the end where she talks about, and I don't want to ruin it for you, but basically she talks about what inspired the story. And you can kind of tell like her stuff is horror, but it's like horror is metaphor. And so Hyde is kind of like a metaphor for like classism, and also like how we, I don't know, like how our essentially children in our society are almost like disposable, because it's just more convenient to keep things at the status quo. And this is very much horror, but it's horror as metaphor for trauma. It's kind of like if you, obviously, like if you've seen, or, the Babadook, which is horror metaphor for depression, or especially postpartum, but any kind of depression or grief. And then, It Follows, which is like, horror as metaphor for STDs. But like, I love that kind of psychological horror. And so again, I'll have more of a thing, on this, but I spent the whole book crying, and it's supposed to be a horror story, and I have never cried. Like, I was honestly so depressed. I think I took like 2 days to like even be able to read something else. I was so emotionally wrecked by this book. And like, I mean, again, it probably just hit really close to home for me, a lot of the stuff that happened. But yeah, like, I loved it, and I can't recommend it enough, but I don't know. I don't know if people will like it or not, because like, it was such a personal read for me that I can't really speak to it, but I loved it. So this one night that comes out today, and this is basically, a girl was murdered, and then they get these invitations. Her whole family gets invitations from the guy who killed her boyfriend. And they all have to go to this like isolated place in the middle of nowhere, this island and this house. And he says he's going to reveal what really happened that night. So obviously a good theme of isolation and loneliness. This is okay. I just felt like it was a little messy. Sometimes like you read things and you're like, the concept is great, but like, I don't know that it just fell together in the way I would have liked. So it was fine, but, it's just kind of a middle of the road for me. And then for my spooky season read, this was the last prompt I did. This is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is great. Like, I would say I gave it 4.5 stars, not 5, just because there's a lot of, like, vivisection and, like, animal stuff. And it's not, I mean, it makes sense, but it's kind of like Catriona Ward's Girl from Roblod, where there's, obviously it's set, this is set in the late 1800s or mid 1800s, I think late 1800s. So obviously scientific discovery and exploration is kind of a thing, and it's a big thing, and so the animal violence is like makes sense because they're like studying some of these animals and their behavior because they're trying to make sense of some stuff going on. But it was just kind of gross. So like I'm like, okay, vivisection just takes 0.5 star for me. But what I will say is, like, obviously I didn't love it as much as Nettle and Bone. But this is based on The Fall of the House of Usher, which is one of my absolute favorite short stories of all time. And essentially, I was like, if you like Fall of the House of Usher, if you like gothic horror, if you like kind of scientific, that scientific discovery, that like late industrial revolution kind of period of, just like where science and like magic were kind of like not that different, and the like pursuit of science. And then it also has like some feminist themes, which is great. T. Kingfisher is now like, it's only my second book of hers, and I can tell you right now, she's one of my favorite writers. Her writing style is phenomenal. So much fun. She's funny, but like it doesn't take away from the quality of the story. So I mean, this is gothic horror, and yet like there are parts I was like laughing out loud at how funny her writing is, and just how like her tone. And it reminds me a lot of Neil Gaiman's writing style. So if you like Neil Gaiman, you probably should check out something by T. Kingfisher. But again, if you like Fall of the House of Usher, if you like Neil Gaiman, if you like that scientific sort of exploration period, you like some feminism, and then also some Last of Us. So if you like those things, go read this book. That was my recommendation there. And then I picked for the team captain's favorites. I was like back and forth on whose I was going to pick. I went with Nala had Daisy Darker, and I had this book, and I like Alice Feeney, so I was like, okay, I'm going to finally get to this because it's been sitting like next to my on my like to-be read list on my nightstand for like over a year. So I was like, I'll read that. And oh my God, this book. This book is everything I've ever wanted in a book. Like, after I finished it, I was like, okay, like, this book was so perfect. And, like, I mean, this is probably at the end of the year. I don't know for sure it'll be my favorite book of the year. But it's definitely going to be on my favorite of the year list. I don't know if it'll be number 1, but it's definitely going to be up there. It's, like, essentially 10 Little Indians with some like family stuff and just a very emotional version. And I don't know how you can pull off a book that can walk this line so well between creepy murder mystery, really just like compelling murder mystery, and like spookiness, with like such a heartfelt like just kick in the face emotional story. To be able to do both is like, it's so impressive, and I loved this book. And I will say, like, a lot of people I've noticed in reviews are like, oh, they didn't like this part of the twist. And the big twist, I called the big twist, I don't even know, like 20 pages in. At one point I was like on the Discord, I think I tagged Nala and was like, hey, and I asked about the twist, and she's like, I'm not telling, and I was like, don't actually tell me, but I wanted to kind of like, I wanted to put that down so that if someone's like, you didn't call it that early, no, I called this right away, and I loved it, and so it like didn't ruin it for me, like it actually, I don't know. I almost wonder if how I would have felt if I hadn't picked up on it. But picking up on it, I think made the story even more emotional for me. And so, like, if you do feel like, oh, I picked up on it, like, there's other twists too that are just fantastic. But this book, I mean, it knocked me out. Like, it was so good. Absolutely going to be one of the best of the year. So, I mean, I've read some really good books this year, and even like on this readathon, I had some really great reads. So those were my 4 for Green Day. So I took the points off from Green Day, and then finally I'll go into like the extra books I read. I didn't read a ton, mostly graphic novels or short things. So the additional books I read was Whisper of the Woods, which is a Mad Cave Studios graphic novel. And I am just pulling this up so I can't remember everything. Yeah, so this was pretty solid. I feel like obviously there's more to it, and it's kind of hard when you read like the first arc because you're like, okay, I'm sure there's more to this series. One of the challenges I had with it is there's things that are written in obviously whatever the language. I don't know if it's like a real other language or if it's just the language of, if it's like a fictional for the story. But there's points where they don't have translation, where a lot of times like the comic will translate different parts. And so you can pick up what's going on, but there are parts where I was like, I don't know what's happening and I feel like it might have been more impactful. So, I mean, it was a good start. And again, I don't know how much more of this. I think Mad Cave Studios is definitely for a comic book, or I don't even think it's Mad Cave Studios. It's Mad Cave. Mad Cave is an underrated publisher for an indie comic publisher, and I've had a really good experience with their comics. So, I mean, obviously you've got your Marvels and DCs, and then you have like IDW and Image is, kind of a big one. And Boom is obviously has been booming the last few years. But Mad Cave, I think, is going to be one of those to watch because they've had some really good stuff. And, that you can tell they're like pretty selective, and they have some really quality art and storytelling. So this doesn't come out until the end of October, but, keep an eye out. The comic might be coming out earlier. I don't know if like they're going to do it in trade or if this is just like the first arc of it. So. And then this came out, Wild Spaces came out today. This is kind of like a Lovecraftian novella. Kind of cool, but I don't want to spoil it because this kind of changed my opinion on the book. The dog dies, and I mean, I knew it was going to come, but yeah, like, I go from, like, if a book could be a 5-star book, if the dog dies, I'm probably not going to love it, unless it, like, totally makes sense. And it has to, like, you have to, like, have a reason for it. And, like, I get why, but I don't think it was needed. I would have enjoyed it more without it. But definitely, like, a good Cthulhu, Lovecraftian kind of novella if you're into that type of horror. It was well written. Like, honestly, I would have been probably 5 stars if the dog was okay. And then I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and I know this is really popular, and I love the cat. And I don't know, to be honest, this might be a translation issue, but I just, like, I couldn't get into any of the stories. I didn't have, like, they didn't have any emotional resonance for me, so I'm probably not going to read any of the other ones in this series. I know a lot of people love it, but again, maybe it was just, I do struggle sometimes with translated books, especially, I find, like, Japanese, I think this is Japanese, but a lot of the Japanese translations, I don't know if it's the writing style in Japan or if it's the translation style or what, but I find a lot of them are very, like, literal and, like, kind of dry in the translations, and so I'm like, I don't know if Japanese writers write that way or if that's just the translation, but I tend to find that, like, it loses some emotional impact because it just feels very, like, telly. And I don't know if that's intentional. The next one I read was Nothing But Blackened Teeth, which was a little bit of a challenge because I was having a conversation with a couple of people who were like, I read this book and it was awful. I was like, it's so short. It's like 100 pages. How bad can it be? And the cover was beautiful, and I've had this for a while, and it's just been like sitting there, and I just keep admiring the cover. So when other people were like, I hated it, I was like, okay, now I got to read it because I have it. I love the cover, and I'm curious if it's really that bad. I didn't hate it. I just didn't love it. And I think there's so much that I think it was more disappointing to me. I found the characters super irritating. And that's just, they kind of were like those pretentious people that I knew in college that I didn't like either at the time. So I don't know, maybe that's partially a me thing. But I also found like the writing a little weird, because like some of the sentences just felt like the writer was like, I'm just going to like thesaurus it up. And they were like, I was like, you did not need to use those words. Like, it was just so over the top. And then other times in the story, like, it was really beautifully written. And then other times it was like, just like, it felt like a frat boy was writing it. And so I just could not get into like the narrative structure. And I think it was just so short that like, maybe if it was longer, I would have gotten, maybe there was like an intent there that I missed. I don't know. So, I mean, the cover's awesome. I mean, again, it's like 100 and something pages. So if it appeals to you, like, you should read it because, maybe you'll have a different experience. And like I said, I didn't hate it. It was disappointing. All right. And this does not come out until January, but this is Where the Body Was, which is Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips' new book. And I will read anything these two work on. Their crime, like, comics are just so good. And this was another perfect one. Like, everything they do is great. I love every single thing they've written. So, I don't know if I gave this. I must have given this 5 stars. Like, it's like I don't even remember. Because, like, sometimes comics, I just can't remember, like, what I was thinking of them at the time. Pretty sure I gave it 5 stars, but, I mean, I'll check at some point. And then, let's see. Sorry. My internet's out, too, so I was, like, looking to see if I could do it, but it just doesn't feel like working. Which really makes things challenging. And then the next thing was, Parasocial, which was, also this comes out October 3rd. I think it's Image. I believe it's Image. It's another comic series / trade. And, I did like this. I thought it was pretty interesting. I mean, I don't know. I didn't necessarily love it, but, again, it's always hard to say, like, comics, I mean, especially when it's only the first book and if it's an arc. I mean, Ed Brubaker, the reason I think, those tend to be, each of the trades tends to be its own full arc and full story, and they're written for trade, and I think this is going to be individual issues, and the same thing with Whisper in the Woods. I think they'll be individual issues, and this is just the trade collection of them. I could be wrong. But, so this was pretty solid, but there are just points where I was like kind of confused as to like what was happening, or I feel like there was going to be more down the line. So it comes out October 3rd, but I mean, both of them seem like series that have a lot of potential that I wouldn't mind seeing what comes next. The Whisper in the Woods and that, and then the Ed Brubaker's comes out in January, and that's just amazing. So Sir Chonk, the reason he's not participating is because he spent most of the month finishing Infinite Jest, and which he then gave 3 stars, and he was like, there are things that were good about this, and then there were things that I was just like, he was not into. I mean, anyone who knows, Infinite Jest is like 1 billion pages. It's David Foster Wallace, and it's not even like 1 billion pages that's like easy. It's like 1 billion pages, very thin paper with like small margins and small font, and it's like just blocks of text. And then footnotes, and David Foster Wallace was brilliant, but also a little like complex and complicated. So I haven't read it, so I can't even speak to it. But I mean, I've seen some movies about him. I've read some of his like short stuff. But yeah, so Sir Chonk was like, took up his whole month. I mean, he had started it before, but that was mostly what he was doing if he wasn't watching movies. And then he read True Grit, which he loves both versions of the movie. So I was like, hey, you should read the book. And he gave it 5 stars, and he loves the girl who's the narrator. So, and then he's still reading Dune McKee by Stephen King. So I'm sure he'll have a lot more to say about that in the August wrap up, and then, you know, which he'll probably also tack on as like more of Stephen King stuff if he reads, you know, more than one. But I mean, I'm sure at some point he'll finish up his Stephen King reviews and rankings. So yeah, so I know this is a very long video. It's like a full hour. But I read a lot this month, and again, there was a lot of explanation to some of them. Some of the ones, like, obviously my absolute favorites of the month were The Only One Left, Prince of Thorns, Dark Corners, probably Just Another Missing Person, Mr. Magic, What Moves the Dead, and then Daisy Darker. Those were my favorites. And several of those, like Dark Pictures and Mr. Magic, are getting full-on reviews, so because they come out next week. So yeah, and I'm sure I'll be, at some point later in the year, I'll be talking about like my favorites of the year. So I feel like some of these will be showing up again. I'm probably going to end up, like I said, I'm sure August is going to get slower, so we'll see how it goes. And that was July, and hopefully you had a good July and you're having a good summer reading. And if you're not, hopefully you're enjoying yourself and doing something other than reading. And then when summer wraps up, you'll get back into your reading. So, yeah, so that's it. All right, thanks. Bye.